The question is that the amendments moved by the honourable member for Kooyong be agreed to. The member for Fairfax.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to speak in opposition to Labor's Future Made in Australia bill. There is nothing wrong with industry policy. The question before the House is whether the policy put forward by the Albanese government is good policy or bad policy. And I stand here today to assert it is bad public policy. In fact, the Future Made in Australia bill is a vile ruse. It's trickery. It's deceitful. And it will not achieve what Labor purports it to be able to achieve. And we always have to remember when it comes to this Albanese government not to take them at their word, because that word gets broken time and time again, but rather don't listen to what they say but look at what they do. And this bill reflects the depth of cynicism to which this government is prepared to go. Let's take the very phrasing of Made in Australia. This is a cynical misuse of a brand that has been built over decades on the part of Australia. Personally, I've spent much of my 20-plus years in business in overseas markets ahead of coming to this place. I know firsthand how many men and women of Australia have built the Made in Australia brand in international markets. They have sweated. Many of them have lost their shirt trying to get deals over the line, but what they always had was the pride in Made in Australia. Indeed, there are companies today who are going through the process with government so they can use the label Made in Australia on their own products. We have legislated in this very parliament how that must be done. And despite having that Made in Australia brand built over many years by Team Australia, successive governments of all stripes, the private sector, the men and women of this country, the Albanese Labor government has decided to steal that brand for themselves. They are taking that brand from Team Australia and giving it to Team Labor in this belief that they will con the Australian people. It's a vile ruse. It's trickery. It is deceitful. And people might say, oh, yeah, but, what's in the title? The title goes to the heart, the cynicism of this government. Now, if you look then at the detail, Deputy Speaker, the Treasurer entered this parliament to table this law, and he made very grand comments about any funding going from the federal government to a sector of the economy or to a project must, and I quote, apply to strict policy frameworks. Strict policy frameworks. Gee, that sounds good. Think about that. It's strict policy frameworks. And it even sounds better when you go to what those frameworks are, Deputy Speaker. The first criteria in the national interest framework is, and I quote, Australian industry is expected to have a sustained comparative advantage in a net zero global economy. So in order for a sector of the economy to be prioritised to get government money, it has to have a sustained comparative advantage. Criteria number one. Sounds good. Anyone who studied economics, they understand that comparative advantage is one of those foundational principles. I mean, it's David Ricardo stuff from the early 1800s. So great, tech sounds good. What has this government done? The first project it announces under this scheme is for $1 billion to manufacture solar panels. Think about that. To manufacture solar panels. Is there a problem with using solar energy? No. Is there a problem with solar panels? No. But if this government was true to what its framework suggests, then it has to be an area of comparative advantage. Australia does not have a comparative advantage in the manufacture of solar panels. Oh, well, I'll take the intervention from the minister at the table. He now thinks that Australia does what, relative to China, relative to the main producers around the world, there is no manufacture. See, this is a problem with this government. Even the industry minister thinks that suddenly Australia actually has an opportunity cost advantage over China on solar panels. This is the cluelessness of this government. But I don't think it's cluelessness. I don't even give him the benefit of the doubt of not knowing what he's talking about. I actually think it's deceitful. I think it's all part of the vile ruse of the Labor Party. Here they talk about comparative advantage of a nation, and their first announcement is actually something that China actually has the full advantage of. And even this industry minister does not know that, or is he, like his colleagues, being deceitful? Because he knows Australia does not have a comparative advantage on the manufacturing of solar panels relative to other countries. That's what a comparative advantage is, Deputy Speaker. Why don't we go to quantum computing? That was their second announcement. Now, who are the beneficiaries of this? Is it really a company that is Australian, or is it an American one? It's an American one. So how about that? The first two announcements actually don't even go to Australia's comparative advantage. And the industry minister here, which I think is quite funny, actually thinks all of these are. I don't know, what's the third biggest comparative advantage, Minister? No, that was his second. He doesn't even know a third. So there you go. Solar panels and quantum computing. This, members of parliament, is what this minister believes are our comparative advantages.
The member for Fairfax will resume his seat. The member for Macarthur on a point of order.
Point of order, Deputy Speaker. The minister is somehow regaling the Shadow Minister is regaling the minister and other members of parliament, not addressing himself through the chair at all. It was quite hysterical. He surely is out of order.
The member for Macarthur will resume his seat. I've raised that with the member for Fairfax, that all comments are through this chair, and I'll ask people on the other side to stop interjecting. This is the chamber. It's not a playground. The member for Fairfax has the call.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. And through you, I refer to this minister and I refer to all of the members on that other side of this parliament, the government, because this is a vile ruse of deceit on the Australian people. Let's go to criteria number 2 in their national interest framework. It says, and I quote, "Public investment is needed for the sector to make a significant contribution to emissions reduction at an efficient cost." Okay, that sounds good. Yet again, sounds great. But don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. It has since been confirmed, Deputy Speaker, that technologies recognised around the world, resources recognised around the world to reduce emissions, to achieve net zero, are excluded by this government, by this policy. So is CCS, carbon capture and storage, is that included? No, it's not. Ideologically, they disagree with it. Blue hydrogen? No, we don't want that either, says the Albanese government. Let alone uranium, let alone nuclear technology, not a chance in the world. This again contradicts their own national interest framework, which is why you have to look at what they do and not at what they say. We also know that once you look at the detail of the flow of money coming through this policy, There is $3.9 billion unaccounted for. $3.9 billion, which does not state on what it will be spent. But here's what we do know. That nearly $4 billion will be used, at least announced, over the next 12 months in an election year. This is a slush fund. This is a cynical slush fund from the Albanese Labor government to try to set them up for an election. And here they are coming in with all the motherhood statements of made in Australia. This is made for the Labor Party. This is made for their election campaign. $3.9 billion, and I invite any member of the Labor Party who is prepared to come into this House, including the minister at the table, to clarify what that $3.9 billion is going to be used for. But they will not say so because it's a slush fund. This is not about Team Australia, this is about Team Labor, and this is why it is cynical. It's a vile ruse. Don't listen to what they say, Deputy Speaker. Look at what they do. It is typical Labor, big government. They pick winners. But when you have a bunch of losers trying to pick winners in the marketplace, it's the Australian people who will always pay. That's been the case to date with this Albanese government, and it will continue to be the case if indeed this so-called future made in Australia passes this House. Now, Deputy Speaker, what this really is trying to mop up failure in policy. If time permitted, I would love an extension of time if the minister would allow me, because I'd like to go through the failures in his policy. But let me just focus on the policy for which I am shadow. That is climate change and energy. Such is the failure of this government that we have seen a tripling of insolvencies in the manufacturing sector since they came to office. The feedback from the manufacturing sector is one of their key problems is the cost of energy. This government looked the Australian people in the eye, this minister did, other members of Labor in this House looked the Australian people in the eye and promised them a $275 reduction in household power bills. $275 coming off household bills. Today, there are areas of Australia where households are paying up to $1,000 more than what Labor had promised. But the impact on business, especially on manufacturing, is far more long-term, because we have manufacturers closing down. We have major energy-intensive manufacturers looking to relocate to the likes of China and India. Now, is that a criticism of China and India? No. But why are they relocating? Energy prices are too high in Australia. Why are energy prices too high? Direct consequence of government policy. Why is government wanting to increase the cost of energy? Because it's coming from technologies they don't like, especially coal and gas. So work this one out. If the policy settings of this government is all about reducing emissions, so they're bumping up the cost of energy, which is what is happening, the companies that get stung go to China and India. In the manufacturing sector alone, emissions from those countries are 3 to 4 times what they are in Australia. So they are, in fact, making emissions worse globally by the policies they are introducing. And that's before you even talk about the collapse of industry, the shedding of jobs, the fact that regional communities are becoming weaker and poorer as a direct consequence of this government. What's the relevance here to the future made in Australia? Well, the relevance is the pork barrelling, which is going to be going on through this policy, will be doubling down on those same failed energy policies. They know full well that the 82% renewable target by 2030 is an unmitigated disaster. It won't be achieved, it's driving prices up, and industry knows that. They know that because industry even tells them that. So what's their solution? Double down on it. Introduce a so-called future made in Australia, when in truth it is going to lead to the closure of industry and would be more honestly rephrased at a future made in China. That is the fact of this bill. Again, Deputy Speaker, can I say in closure, do not listen to what the Labor Party says. Look at what they do. This policy is nothing but a vile ruse to help the Labor Party, certainly not Team Australia.